Welcome to IMI's Trials at Home External Webinar, a center of excellence for remote and decentralized clinical trials. Good afternoon. My name is Dwayne Schultes. I'm the Managing Director of Vital Transformation. I'm also the co-lead of the communication work package of Trials at Home called Code. So thank you very much for joining us today. We very much look forward to having your participation. Now, before we get started, just a couple items of house cleaning that we'd like to work through with you. If you are having trouble with your audio connection, if you're having trouble with the internet speed and you're having dropouts, please feel free to switch to the phone. Next to the mute button, there's a little arrow, and you can switch to from computer audio to the telephone. We provided several dozen phone numbers for you, so please feel free to switch to the phone number so you engage with the entire webinar. We don't want you to miss any of the conversation or not have your input. As well, we will also be taking questions from the audience. We really do want your participation. We've had over 300 registrations for this webinar. We appreciate having you here, and we want your questions to be submitted. So please feel free to do so with the question bar, and we'll be taking them as we filter through the webinar. So again, thank you very much for your time and participation. The Trials at Home Consortia will explore the opportunities of moving clinical trials from the traditional clinical setting to the participants' immediate surroundings. These so-called remote decentralized clinical trials, or RDCTs, make use of new digital innovations and enable participants to visit a clinical trial center less frequently, if at all. And today, presenting from the project, we have several of the project leads, and I'd like to begin by introducing the three project leads. First off, we have Rick Groba from the UMCU. Rick, good afternoon or good morning.
Hello. Hi, Dwayne. Hi, audience.
Thank you. We also have our project co-leads, Mira Zudgist. Hello, Mira.
Hi, good morning. Happy to be here.
And we also have Kim Hawkins. Good morning, Kim.
Hi, everyone.
And then from the technical work package, we also have Kai Langle. Kai, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having us.
And we also have Joran de Brun. Hello, Joran. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Happy to be there.
Thank you very much, everyone. So to begin, we're going to have an introduction from Rick, who's going to give us a little background on the project. Rick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dwayne. I think I have a single slide that sort of summarizes what Trials at Home stands for. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce this exciting project to all of you. We're still in sort of early phase, and to some extent, Trials at Home is still a bit of a well-kept secret, but not after today. I'm sure after we have had an opportunity to introduce some of the features of this project to you. Now, the background is clear. Clinical trials are here to stay. They are essential in demonstrating the efficacy and safety of new interventions such as medicines, but they also come with challenges. Recruitment and retention of patients is a challenging aspect in clinical trial execution. Trials tend to be costly, but also burdening on patients. And some of the hurdles and barriers that we experience in running trials is the lack of patient awareness of clinical trials, sometimes even because of physical distance to clinical trial sites. Patients have to visit clinics for interventions, for measurements, for diagnostics, which can take a lot of time and trouble. And it's not surprising that a fair number of patients is dropping out in trials, up to 30%, which is affecting the validity of the outcome of such studies. So in this era, and due to the unprecedented times many of us are experiencing how this works, in this era, there is emerging digital technologies that can be put to use, and which then forms the basis for remote decentralized clinical trials. It is a new, perhaps not even so disruptive anymore, approach of setting a trial around a patient rather than in a centralized trial setting. And that's what we'll speak about today. You'll hear how Trials at Home is going to tackle this and try to get a new paradigm for trials that would enable more patients to be included, to scale up trials more easily, and to have larger and more representative patient populations in studies. So that's the menu for today, and I'm pleased to give the floor back to Dwayne to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Rick. So now we're going to be looking at the project as a whole, and I'm going to be introducing our two project co-leads, Kim Hawkins and Mira Zudgist. Ladies, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dwayne. So I'll take the start here, and together with Mira, we'll sort of take you through an overview of the project, the status, and where we are today with some of our key activities and deliverables. So as you just heard from Rick, describing sort of the background and the overall aims of Trials at Home, it really should come as no surprise that we really are going to need a very broad base of stakeholders and involvement, support, input from those stakeholders to be able to accomplish these goals. In addition to a very wide variety of consortium members, we have assembled a stakeholder and advisor panels so that we can gain this feedback and insight and really pave the road for change. I think, maybe a main point here is that there's not really a single group or entity that can accomplish this on their own, right? This is going to be a big paradigm shift, and we need a really broad base of stakeholders and their involvement. And ultimately, we want to be able to have some influence on new guidelines and possibly new regulations to be able to incorporate these remote and decentralized trial approaches. And I think especially really making sure that we're incorporating the voice of the patient and the voice of the researchers and investigators into that change. So on the next slide, I think this just illustrates this point well. You can see our full consortium membership here. We have 30+ representatives, and we've got a large industry and academic support, along with some smaller enterprises, patient associations, and technology companies. So I think a good solid base to start with. So on the next slide, we're going to take you through some of the project objectives and some of our key deliverables. So we've broken out the project into 6 main work packages. Let me start with work package 1, which is best. So this work package will look at what's been done so far and identify best practices. So we've looked across the consortium. We've looked externally at published reports to be able to identify case studies so that we can look at lessons learned, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, what some of the major challenges are. In our tech work package, we'll be looking again at the environment. What are the technologies that exist today that can help to enable RDCTs? We'll also be looking at what technologies possibly could be coming in the future and keeping an eye on that. In our pilot work package, we'll be actually designing and implementing a pan-European pilot to be able to test some of these approaches out. In our Eagle work package, we'll be identifying and mapping the different data privacy, ethical, quality, regulatory constraints, and importantly, enablers of RDCTs. In our work package code, we really want to focus this work package on our stakeholder engagement, how we can best communicate and leverage and engage our different stakeholders that we've just discussed. And finally, our work package proms, which is going to ultimately be putting out our recommendations at the end of the day, but also very involved in a lot of our project management activities. So on the next slide, I really wanted to give a quick view on how these work packages have some very key interdependencies. As you can see, the main 4 work packages, Best, Tech, Eagle, and Code, will be feeding the pilot in the beginning stages of this project. So what we've learned from taking the temperature of the environment, what we've learned from best practices will go into the pilot study, and then coming out of the pilot will again feed into our final recommendations. I think it's really important, though, to also note that while this is going on, we will still in parallel be evaluating the environment. So the project won't be limited to just the findings from the pilot, but also what's happening in the environment in parallel. And eventually, we'll have recommendations coming out of this pilot, out of this project as our final deliverable. So why don't I now turn it over to Mira, who's going to give us an update on some of our current status and key deliverables.
Yes, thanks, Kim. So now that Rick and Kim indeed introduced more the why and how of our Trials at Home project, I'll shortly discuss what this looks like in practice over the 5-year time period of our project. And after that, Kai and Jeroen, our tech leads, will go into detail on the tech side and the open RFI, which we want to draw your attention to with this webinar. So as Kim already mentioned, each work package has its specific focus, and the insights they gather are both used to feed into the pilot work package to shape the pan-European pilot, but also very much to provide broader recommendations on that specific topic. And maybe as an example, the recommendations on tech use that will come out of the tech work package will not be limited to the specific tech package. It will be used in the pan-European pilots. So as you can see here, these are the broad timelines of our project. The first deliverables are in the best and tech work package, which are there for month 12, where best will provide a first set of best practice formulated recommendations, and tech will launch the open call for technologies to be used within the pan-European pilots. In the meanwhile, Pilot Eagle and Code are also already continuing to work on certain aspects. Pilot is starting to make a lot of the pivotal choices we need to make for the pan-European pilot study, and I'll discuss one of those in a bit more detail in a bit. Eagle is already starting to map the EU legislation within the different countries. What are we and are we not allowed to do regarding remote approaches in these different countries? Code is already setting up stakeholder surveys on what do the patients want regarding RDCT approaches, how will sites responsibilities be changing with RDCT approaches, etc. So then maybe for our next big milestone is that at month 18, Eagle will have a map on the EU legislation with a specific focus on certain countries. And then in month 32, Pilot will have their first patient first visit for the pan-European pilot study. As Kim already mentioned, the other work packages will provide broader recommendations than just the ones coming out of the pilot. But of course, the pilot findings will be fed back into all the work packages so that they can update the recommendations with those specific findings. And that will happen in month 54. We will get all the different recommendations and tools from the different work packages, after which we'll have a final set of recommendations and tools ready at month 60, so at the end of this 5-year project. In all our work, we are incorporating the fast-moving changes in the clinical trial landscape, which are currently happening, which Rick already referred to as well. And I think what's important to mention is that we are looking at what's happening now, what's changing, but we'll definitely also keep track of what might change back, so that we can ensure that our recommendations are of value for the new normal situation, so to say, in the future. Yes, before we go to the tech part, we want to share one of the larger decisions that has already been made for the pan-European pilot study, because it's also of importance for the request for information, and that is that diabetes has been chosen as the therapeutic area for the pan-European pilot. Important to mention once again that the rest of the project remains a broader focus, but that the trial will zoom in on diabetes. And this choice has been made based on the pre-approved assessment procedure. And there are several criteria that we're taking along, which include scientific and operational criteria, which you can see on this slide. So we both looked at which therapeutic area can really benefit from RDCT approaches, which population, can we see a clinical value of a study in this therapeutic area that we can also address within the pan-European pilot study. Because of course, the main focus of the pan-European pilot study is to compare the operational approaches. But there's also a very important focus on that the participants in this study can get a clinical benefit out of participating. So that's also what we took along. And then also we looked at whether the results we get from this study can be to some extent generalized to other situations, other therapeutic areas. Besides that, we had to take along quite some operational criteria as well, because we have a specific budget and a specific time frame for this pan-European pilot study, and this the whole study needs to fit within this. So in the end, diabetes came out as the first choice for the pan-European pilot study. It basically meets all the predefined assessment criteria. There's a high disease burden. It's a large, broad population. There's several unanswered research questions still. And there's a lot of value in doing remote approaches for this therapeutic area. So this is really what we are aiming to do in this Trials at Home project, to really investigate in depth and prove and refute some of the claims made for randomized decentralized clinical trials, and provide concrete recommendations with supporting tools and standards for the implementation of remote decentralized clinical trials. And with that, I want to give the word back to Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Mida and Kim. We're now going to turn to our technical work package with Kai and Jordan, talking about the request for information, the RFI. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Thank you. Who's going to start? Jordan, you're going to please. Thank you.
Yeah, when you look at a specific clinical trial, our first task was to break it down into simple basic building blocks, or not so simple basic building blocks. And if you look at the image, you see that there are 4 core phases: setup and design, recruitment and enrollment, intervention and follow-up, and finally closeout and reporting. And they are enclosed by supporting activities such like patients engagement, where we try to onboard patients, keep the patient in. Then there's data acquisition and processing, which helps with data assessment and trial assessment. And finally, operation and coordination in order to plan everything. So we took this trial model, this trial activity model, and we actually tried to break it up into single phases in order to have these phases act as reference models and synchronize both between the work packages as well as within, in order to efficiently find tasks and identify technologies, for example, or to establish criteria for these technologies that we identify, to see which one fits best in our trial vision. So during this process, we identified more activities and assigned activities to certain of these basic building blocks, some even spanning basic building blocks. So what we did is we first identified these activities and then build work groups around these basic building blocks in order to further refine these activities and create a vision for the Trials at Home project. So how do we think such activities within these basic building blocks can actually be done in a remote and decentralized fashion? So Kai, if you could take over and
yeah, I can. Jeroen, just one question about your previous slide, the on and off switches. Do you want to just say something about that as well?
Oh yeah, sure. We want to, of course, be able to compare our remote decentralized clinical trial model with a hybrid variety or maybe a classical trial. So by switching them on and off, we actually enable technologies to be remote and decentralized for each of these basic building blocks.
Yeah. So I think that's an additional layer of complexity on top of already pretty complex setup, because we have to cater for both the remote decentralized model as well as the more classical or hybrid models with the sort of ideally a single technology package. So indeed, for us to manage that work, we created these building blocks and then teams within those building blocks. And I think Trials at Home is a really fantastic opportunity for us, and that kind of highlights the importance of these public-private partnerships, because this opportunity allows us to really experiment with completely fresh, new vision for technologies and operations in this kind of trial. And this would be very hard for us to do inside our current companies. So for example, within Janssen, We have, of course, many legacy systems in place, all kinds of SOPs that we need to follow, and certain working practices that have been established, and that's very difficult to change. Here, Trials at Home gives us a completely blank canvas to paint with and come up with a completely new vision for these things. So we really have the opportunity to push the boundaries of innovation and make sure that we do things that will be relevant in about 5 years' time. And what is relevant, of course, has recently changed with COVID and all of that. But this is now what all of these building block teams are trying to think through. So here we are zooming into one of the building blocks called the intervention and follow-up, that I happen to be leading a team that is working through this. So within this building block, we have 6 activities. So we have all of the different types of visits. So both on-site clinic visits in the conventional way, as well as home health visits, and also remote visits through telemedicine. Then we have also all of the IMP, so the investigational medicinal product, so supplying the study drug to patients, shipping directly to them, or to shipping directly to a local depot, like a pharmacy, where they can then pick up the medication and then use as instructed in the protocol. And then we'll be following up with smart adherence or compliance monitoring to make sure that people do follow the protocol. So those are the 6 activities that we are focusing on. Across the project, there's about 60 of these activities in the different building blocks. And the intent here is to develop a bit of a holistic vision for the technologies and operations around these activities. So instead of looking at individual activities and ending up with a 1,000-piece puzzle that needs to be assembled, or trying to think through all of that at once, we think about it in these building blocks, and then make sure that we have a vision how to operationalize all of these activities with the right technology, operations, and all of that. So if you go to the next slide, then to operationalize those activities on the previous slide, we have in this team come up with some technological needs. This is just an example of the kinds of things that you might then see in the open call later on, where we already present a bit of thinking around the kinds of things that we'll be calling for. So here we have a vision that we need a digital platform for the decentralized site to handle all of the workflow, communications between the different members of the decentralized site. The participants, of course, play a role in that as well. So this needs to integrate with the participant-facing system, which is part of another building block. So that is then, I think, a good example of the different sort of interfaces between the building blocks that we need to think about. But that's kind of the vision that we have at the moment. We talk about the telemedicine component that could be part of the digital platform, but also could be a plugin. So we are open to different ways, and these visions are not intended to be extremely prescriptive, because we want to hear from the ecosystem around us to see how exactly different platforms and solutions could fulfill the vision. So there is enough flexibility for providers to recommend best approaches, ideally feeding into this vision that we provide. Then number 3, logistical services. So this means that we also need services, not just pieces of technology. So we need services to be able to deliver the IMP to participants and be able to track the shipments. But here the vision is like, instead of typical like a RTSM system for typical supplies management in a trial, we have a bit of a vision for something that would look a bit more like an Amazon delivery system, where participants can see where the shipments are. They'll be able to schedule them to arrive at a certain time at the right place and things like that. Smart medication solutions connected to these different platforms, so we can really then monitor patients remotely in near real time. And these are the 4 components that we think we need to operationalize those activities that we have. If you now go to the next slide. Thank you. This is kind of the same information in a visual format. So you have the sort of virtual site, the decentralized site there in the middle, with the PI leading the activities, and they are all using this digital platform that has the workflow, the communications between them, and case management features and things like that, with integrations with the courier system, with the telemedicine, and also the patient platform. And here we also illustrate that, all of these could be built into the digital platform. If somebody has such a platform, ideally we would like to simplify this as much as possible, but we are open to different approaches. And also just want to highlight that if you think about the different activities, the list of activities in itself, it doesn't really look all that, remote or decentralized and all of that. The other work that we have has been going on in the background to prepare for these visions and all of that is that we have been working on what we call the trial activity model. So those activities that would look dramatically different from the conventional model, we have been developing what we call blueprints. So these kind of blueprints kind of outline the key activities or key steps within an activity, who are the roles in that activity, what are the technology solutions and how they would be used to support that sort of activity. So that's kind of a nice little flow chart that we've been putting together for those activities that look different than before. We have also been running some design panels with our potential users. So we did one panel with study participants to understand what kind of features and designs would be important for them. We just did another design panel with the decentralized site staff. So we had remote PIs, remote study coordinators, home health visiting staff, and also concierge staff to understand how this technology package could help them do their job. And through these panels, we've been able to get quite a bit of detail in terms of what kind of design, what kind of features we need these platforms to have, and all of that has been kind of incorporated in this high-level vision. So we have a lot more detail behind these high-level images and all of that, but that's then going to be more relevant once we get access to these technologies and actually start the assembly process to configure everything and get it ready for the pan-European pilot starting at month 32. So that's some of the work leading up to now, and I think Jeroen will talk a bit more about the RFI and the upcoming open call. So Jeroen, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Kai. So yes, like Kai mentioned, we're still searching for technologies, and we're doing that actively. There's a small group that's going basic building block by basic building block in order to identify technologies that are present currently. We look at other IMI projects. We look at Google searches. We look at registries that already have several software and technology packages registered for clinical trials. So we're looking at all that, but we're kind of a small group, and there's a lot of time pressure because at month 12 we need to give a deliverable in which we propose a technology package, or that's at month 18, but at least we need to have some kind of idea what's out there. So another way that we thought of on gathering information on technologies and what's out there and what's new for remote decentralized clinical trials is to use a sort of crowdsourcing method, and that's what we call the request for information. So at the website, you can see it here in the image on https://trialsathome.com, request for information. We encourage vendors and technology creators to actually submit their solution if they have one. Again, we match it by those basic building blocks that we have, and right now we are looking for both general solutions as well as solutions specific to the TA, but we're doing that by basic building blocks. Thus, we encourage vendors and technology solution providers to go to this website. I think there were already a few questions on where you could go and more information for the RFI. So you can go to this website and then submit your technology solutions, and we'll review it. Like we said, there are also some quality measurements that are being defined right now. We will take all solutions into account, rate them, and hopefully get the best project software for our pilot project. And that's all from Mike.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So now is the time for all of you out in the audience. Again, thank you. We've had close to 200 of you today on our webinar. We're very grateful. This is the opportunity for you to ask questions of our panel. Again, you can use the question bar and submit your questions. We have 19 questions already, so we've got plenty of things to get through, everybody. I'm going to stop the share now. Thank you. So everyone's now with us. So the first question here I have, and this is from Bart Stevens. Thank you for the question, Bart. How does this project relate to Transcelerate? Transcelerate obviously is the public-private partnership that works on speeding up clinical trials. Is there any relationship to Transcelerate? Kai, do you want to take that from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. There's no relationship really. Transcelerate is actually not a public-private partnership. It's more of a private pharma partnership, which makes it very, very different from the IMI setup. So IMI joins the public side, so academia and all of these SMEs, technology companies, with the industry. That makes this very different. That's why you see such a rich consortium in this project, for example, with different stakeholders represented. So it's quite a different project indeed. And also IMI is a European project, so that also makes it quite different. I don't know, maybe the project leaders will also have a comment on that.
Mira, do you want to jump in?
So indeed, as public partners, we're not part of Transcelerate, but I can speak also for the pilot work package, and that we don't want to duplicate efforts. So we do look at what they are doing already, and if there's a template in a checklist or anything that's being produced there that's of value to us, then we'll definitely use it. And we also have some cross-pollination in the sense that there's quite a few people on our team that have a lot of experience with Transcelerate. So we'll make the best of what they have already designed and delivered.
Thank you. We have a question here from a colleague many of us know, Rob Thwaites. Hello, Rob. Hope you're doing well. Rob's asking, which other IMI projects do you expect to work closely with? Now, as I understand it, we have leveled a relationship with Trials at Home and the EU's joint undertaking Excel. Can you express a little bit about that?
Yes, well, Excel is not IMI, but it's sort of structured in the same way. It's a public-private partnership, but in this case, it's a public-private partnership, which is also EU-driven for electronic components and systems. They contacted us, I think last year, because through IMI, and IMI contacted us again because they were very interested in creating technologies for these kinds of remote decentralized clinical trials. So we've been in contact with them for a while now. We have explained our vision on RDCTs. We have explained them how Trials at Home plans to act on that vision and how we plan to organize a remote decentralized clinical trial. And based on these contacts and these interactions, there is now an IMI Excel joint activity. It's called Next Generation Digital Technologies for Remote Decentralized Clinical Trials. And based on partially our visions, they issued this call, which is due 30th of September. It's a one-stage call, which will help us from Trials at Home maybe to find some gaps that we are currently missing in the RDCTs, and maybe in the end find some new technology that we could really use in this kind of clinical trials and really improve on it.
That's great, thank you. We have a question here from John Walsh, who is a patient representative. He says, my large concern is adverse events. You didn't cover that. How are you going to manage adverse events? That's my question. Who would like to? Rick, do you want to answer this? Yes, Rick.
Sure. No, it's not only a concern, it's a necessity that whatever eventually results from our investigations leads to clinical trials that are remote, but still able to detect any safety signals. So the benchmark is what can come out of a conventional clinical trial. And one of our aims for the pilot study, but also some of the investigations around that, is to assure that any safety concerns, any adverse events are as detectable as they are in a conventional setting. And in fact, we suspect that perhaps some of our remote technologies might even be better in detecting signals, for example, while using wearables that are probably more sensitive even than conventional methods that rely on queries mainly.
Thank you, Rick. Again, we're going to try to get through all your questions. They're backing up. We've got close to 30 in now. This is fantastic. We really appreciate them. Keep them coming. We have a question here from a Fremont Schließ regarding the pan-European pilot on diabetes. Wow, it just moved. How will you decide your endpoints, and are you considering the Apple trial, the format and the phase of the design? Kim, how did we decide our endpoints and the design?
So I actually, maybe I'll give this one over to Mira since she's
okay. Mira?
Yeah, sure. So I personally, we have not looked at the Apple trial yet. I would say, I think what's important to mention about the endpoints is that the aim of the trial is, of course, to compare the operational approaches. So we are looking at key performance indicators as some of the most important endpoints for our trial. What we are looking at is indeed what Rick already mentioned. Some things have to, like quality of data and safety follow-up, they have to be as good as they are in conventional trials. And then remote decentralized clinical trials, there's many claims on how they can improve clinical trials. And some of those, like recruitment and retention, we really want to find out whether that's indeed improved with remote or hybrid approaches. On top of that, we will have a clinical improvement strategy with an important clinical endpoint, but the main approach and the main focus is on comparing the operational approaches.
Thank you, Mira. Anybody else would like to follow up on that? Nope. Okay, thank you. We have a question here from Ziger de Groot. Are there already any learnings best practices from the best worst package can be shared? Where are we at now, and where are we at with best?
So we will be, as part of our first, one of our first big deliverables, I think Mara mentioned earlier.
Kim, can you come a little closer to your computer, please? Just a touch.
Sure, sound.
Thank you very much.
Is that better?
Yes.
So as part of one of our first major deliverables and the work best package is a set of draft recommendations that will be coming out at month 12, which is August of this year.
That's great, thank you. We have another question here from Ziger de Groot. I'm going to give him favorable here. Will you prepare a pilot that may need to run without any face-to-face interactions due to COVID-19? And I guess more broadly, how has the project been impacted? How has the planning changed given the pandemic? Rick, I'll start with you on that, Rick.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So in a way, everything is accelerating. When we first looked into remote decentralized clinical trials context, we noticed that there's still many barriers, regulatory, for quality reasons. There's many restrictions. Now, there still are, but clearly the COVID epidemic is affecting that. And we assume that we'll enter a situation where there is much more room for innovation. So in that sense, anything that we're now exploring trials at home is probably touching upon a lot of appetite for that. For the remote, for the pilot study they may have in mind, and I think that was also another question that I noticed. We are looking into different levels of remoteness. So starting from the traditional clinical trial outlook all the way to as remote as can be, and see what works best. Because there's no guarantee that fully remote is the best option in any setting. For example, from the perspective of patients, but also in terms, as was mentioned before, full safety coverage. So we're not looking at a single strategy, but we're really exploring, as Jeroen also showed in his cartoon with the on-off switches, to different modalities.
Thank you. A quick question here, Elizabeth Tangar. Will the slides be sent after the call? Yes, Elizabeth, we'll be sending the slides as well as the video. We will make that public. So yes, you will have all the information. A technical question here from Iana Keeley. How does Trials at Home plan on managing the clinical data in different standards? For example, hospital healthcare EHR systems in HL7, observational investigator-led trials using Odyssey, OMOP, etc., interventional pharmaceutical trials with CDIS, etc. Who wants to take a bite at that? Kai, Joran, please.
So it all depends on the technologies that get selected. I mean, most technologies implement their own standards. As far as I know, very little normal or agreed on standards or implementation guides actually exist for specific technologies. So it actually all depends on what the technologies are, what technologies get selected, and indeed, then interoperability becomes an issue. We somehow need to find some modeling standard that we can put everything in, be it a normal relational database and no standard at all, through OpenEHR or other trial data models. But it's certainly something that is being planned for right now. But until the technologies and specific implementation guides on standards are selected, it's just basic planning and hoping that most of the technologies or standards agree. It will also be a selection criteria on how good integration of technologies can take place. So it's definitely something that we are considering while selecting the technologies.
Kai, obviously J&J has been heavily involved in the development of the Odyssey platform. Is there any conversation or discussion about working with the Eden project of IMI? Has there been any cross-fertilization, which obviously J&J and Nigel Hughes are very involved with?
Yeah, so Janssen leads a lot of IMI projects. We have a huge portfolio, close to 100 of these. So we are thinking not only project where Janssen is involved, of course, but across the IMI portfolio of 150 or so project. Many of these could be relevant. There's a nice blockchain project, the Pharma Ledger. There's Eden. There's the EU Pearl, these platform trials projects. So we are starting some conversations with some of those, and some of them have been going on for a while to see what synergies there could be between the projects. So yeah, we are looking into that, where exactly those synergies are and how timelines and all of these things fit together is still a bit unclear. But we definitely have our eyes and ears open for any opportunities to work together.
Thank you, Kai. We have a question here from Carlo Masticelli, sorry. Can you give more information on the timeline of the pilot? When exactly is the target date for launch, and how involved with the EMA and other regulators be throughout the process? Who wants to go after that one? Yes, Mida, please.
Yes, so we showed a little bit of the timelines in the last slide, right? The idea of the first patient, first visit is at month 32 of the project. And the question about the EMA involvement is a very important one, and we are currently discussing with Eagle, with the EMA, what would be the best route for our projects. So we do aim for an official advice route by the EMA. There's two options there, basically. There's the scientific advice and there's the qualification procedure, which both make sense for our projects, and we're discussing which makes most sense there. But they're definitely involved. The leads in Eagle have very close connections, and they do a lot of regulatory work. So yeah, this is what we are currently discussing.
Thank you. So we have a question here from Miro Valchev. Would there be any requirement for the different technology medical devices to fit together? In other words, interoperability. Are we looking for interoperability standards or not? Who would like to take that one? Kai, do you want to discuss the interoperability issue?
Yeah, sure. So we have a specific building block team focused entirely on these integrations and interfaces between the building blocks. So they are taking a deep dive into that, and they will develop their vision how they intend to glue all of this stuff together. So we should be able to have more detail when the open call opens at month 12. So that's when these visions from these teams will be released through the open call. So that's when you can expect to have a bit more detail.
That's great. We have a question here from a Susan Bhatti. Are there any plans to set up an app for patients to use remotely to find a trial site included in the pilot study, which is located? So are we doing any app development and remote app usage? Is that part of the plan? I suppose, again, Joran or Kai, this is part of your wheelhouse.
So yeah, let me take this quickly. So the patient-facing aspects go across many building blocks. There's one building block for patient engagement. There's another one for recruitment and onboarding that can potentially use an app or some sort of a patient-facing solution. So again, those teams are working on figuring out what exactly the vision would be for the patient-facing technologies to be used. And more details will be released at the open call when they can then inform the community about what technology needs they have. But yes, there will be patient-facing technologies, whether it's an app or web system or whatever. We are not going to prescribe that in too much detail. We want to leave some room for innovation coming from the provider ecosystem as well. But there will be patient-facing technologies of that nature for sure.
Yeah, so we have been doing the scanning on technology so far, and we found quite a few apps, especially in patient engagement, that actively try to engage patients in staying connected to a clinical trial. So I would say it's quite likely that certainly one or more apps could make their way into the Trials at Home project.
That's great, thank you. Another question here from Freemut Schleiss. How many patients do we plan to include in our trial? In other words, in the arms, I guess, how big will the power be? What are the numbers are we looking for? It's an epi question. Rick, what do you think? What are the sort of size of the trial we're looking for from an epidemiological standpoint?
Yes, as usual, the size will depend on what outcomes we're going to choose, and Mira spoke on that already. We're looking into the sort of optimal set of outcomes. In my vision, there's probably not one unique final outcome that we're interested in. It's really a range of outcomes. So we have to look at those outcomes that we need the most power for. A guesstimate at this point in time would be a couple of hundred in each arm, probably not more.
Okay. Amira, any other comment on that, or? No, fine, thank you very much. What are the plans for auditing source data validation and quality assurance? So how are we auditing our processes? Urin, can you perhaps discuss that?
Well, there has been a data management plan so far, but the true data management plan isn't due for, I think, month 24, 28. So we're currently still considering the best ways. It's, again, influenced by the technologies that are out there and how we can do this remotely as well. So we're still looking for that. We're still looking for technologies that can actually support on this process. And in cooperation with Eagle, we will then assess these technologies on these auditing mechanisms and how well they correspond to current legislation.
That's great, thank you. We have a question here from a Sarah Wamala Anderson. She says her research group and she are interested in research collaborations related to the use of real-world evidence effectiveness monitoring outcomes that matter. How do we get in contact? Who should they approach? So what would be the process then to reach out to the project? Rick, please go ahead.
We're always interested in like-minded individuals and groups that we can learn from or benefit from collaboration. So I would advise to send us an email, get in contact, and we can explore what can be done or cannot be done together.
That's great, thank you. Another question from Ziger de Groot. How do you decide which technologies and or platforms to use for the pilot? I guess, how are we basing our decision? And then how are we going to determine best practice analyses regarding other new innovative structures, technologies externally? So how are we going to make the evaluation, and what's the process to compare to other technology platforms, I guess?
Oh, within Work Package 2, there's an entire segment dedicated to finding those quality criteria, both functional and non-functional, that can be rated. So in a quantitative scale, and based on the best score, so the best total score on how a technology solution functions, also with some of the criteria that I mentioned before, interoperability, even if it supports these best practices that will be found by best, and if they are all the way remote, or if they are only partially remote. So there's a whole set of quality criteria that we will use to assess each kind of technology solution on, and we will then choose those technological solutions that fit best and are fit for purpose, so to speak.
That's great, thank you. We have another question here from Marta Delamo, and this is discussing patient aging. Do you think that the use of a technology or technologies may prevent enrollment of a population that's more elderly, given the fact that many of the more elderly population are higher risk for diabetes? How are we going to deal with age skew, and are we concerned that that will perhaps have an impact on our demographics? Yes, Kai.
Yeah, I can speak for that. I personally have run a diabetes trial, fully decentralized, fully remote, with very good results, with the average age in the population being 55, with multiple 70+ individuals there. And we surveyed the participants at the end of the project, and the scores for technology use and the ease of use and all of that were all very high. So the range of scoring was from 0 to 5, and everything was above 4. So the technology was pretty well accepted, so it can be done. I think we just need to be mindful of not making it too complicated. That's where the design aspects become really, really critical, and that's something we've been trying to hone in the first few months, to understand what is important to patients and how do we best serve them, what kind of features they need and what kind of features they don't want. So I think the design matters a lot, but it certainly can be done, and that is. This one case study is one that we will be analyzing as well in the project, in the best work package, to understand what are those best practices that we need to implement to make sure it is successful. Great question. I think all workable, but it needs a dedicated effort to make sure that we do the right thing there.
And Rick, you wanted to come in, please.
Yes, because there's also a flip side to the current situation where there's personal patient contact. I believe that there's serious selection also in current trials for elderly patients that are, for example, not mobile, or otherwise not able to follow the procedure or visit frequency that is required for conventional clinical trials. So there's also opportunities there to be more inclusive.
Thank you. That's a fine point. We have a question here from Mark Woodward. What's the vision for independent adjudication of the pilot? In other words, how are we involving external stakeholders to make sure that we have, involving patients, for example, non-fatal events, etc. So what's the external validation process of our approach? Who would like to take that on?
So maybe I'll start and others can jump in. Sure. So we have both set up an external stakeholder panel, which we can use as a consultative body throughout the life of the project. It's got a very wide variety of stakeholders. We have patient reps, we have industry experts, we have technology experts. It's a very wide, a wide variety of panel members. We've also set up a scientific advisory board that will be giving us, very specific advice over the life of the project.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment? Nope. Kim, you've answered it 100%. Thank you very much. This is a question from Carlo Martuccelli again. To what extent was COVID-19 a catalyst for the project getting off the ground? In other words, was COVID-19 part of the reason why we started? Rick, you want to address that?
No, certainly not. We started preparing this quite a while ago. So this was long before any one of us was foreseeing what would be happening now. As I said before, I do think it's going to help us and catalyze some of the things that we want to achieve. And it certainly has underlined the relevance of a project like Trials at Home in the current era.
Question here from Miro Valchev. What countries will be involved in the pilot? Have we selected countries? Mira, yes.
So no, we have not selected the specific countries yet. What we have agreed is that we want a spread across Europe, a spread across type of healthcare systems. So we are aiming for at least 5 countries within the pan-European pilots. It also depends on what comes out of the best recommendations. It depends on what comes out of EAGLE, on what approaches we can and cannot use in the different countries. So we're toning in on the different options now, but no definite decisions have been made yet.
And a follow-up here from Luke Dika. Thanks for the nice presentation. Is this limited to EU country sites only, Mira?
So the pan-European pilot will be conducted in the EU only, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We, ladies and gentlemen, are running out of time. I'm going to be able to take just a couple more questions, unfortunately. Question here from Juliana Wild. How are we managing our data protection? What is our process for data protection and management? Who is in charge and what is the process? So who would like to address data protection? Nobody? Kai, do you want to take data protection?
Yeah, I mean, I can make a quick comment.
Please, Kim.
I mean, that will have to be defined through our EAGLE working group. And clearly, we're going to have to operate within the environment that exists today. So we'll have to incorporate all of those regulations and rules across the different countries as well into how we run our pilot.
And that's something that the tech work package needs to, of course, take into account in the assembly of the technologies working together with EAGLE.
Sure, thank you very much, yes. And obviously with the external stakeholder platform, a lot of those questions will also be, anything we do will be cleared by the ESP as well, which is our sort of external validation methodology. This is from Simon Beconnier. How do you envision the dissemination or selected use case linked with the call already recent published, the Excel call? So how are we working with their plan, I suppose, Jörn? Are we going to work closely with their dissemination or are we going to work in parallel?
Well, they have asked us for our vision, our advice, and we have communicated. So they have been, to a certain extent, shaping their call. Some of the partners that we have at Trials at Home might even be interested in participating in their call. But to a certain extent, it's all about us informing them how we see our trials at home. And their call is actually separate from our call. So we do not expect technologies from their side to be in our open call. The deadlines are just too short for that. So they are two independent calls, but in the long run, they may influence our projects and vice versa.
Mira, you have a point?
Yeah, so maybe to add to that, indeed, at first when we started talking to Excel, we really discussed whether it wouldn't be possible to incorporate some of the technologies they may develop within our pan-European pilot project. But unfortunately, timelines are too short for that. But we can definitely incorporate some of their ideas into our final recommendations. So I think that's where the back and forth is. We provide information on possible gaps, and they provide possible new solutions for those gaps, which we can then evaluate and take along.
Okay, thank you. We're almost out of time, ladies and gentlemen. So with the panel, I just want to ask each of you just one simple question. If you could just answer it very quickly. What do you think is the one key deliverable you would like to see to make this project a success? What's the one key thing you think we need to deliver to be successful? Rick, I'll start with you. What's the one key deliverable that you think we need to have?
Yeah, the one key deliverable is a set of recommendations that really will push the setting which clinical trials are being run forwards, and hopefully measured by more inclusion of patients, better retention of patients, better access of patients to clinical trials, and therefore to the medications that they study.
Kim, from your perspective, what's the one key deliverable?
So the only thing I would add to that really is, I really hope to see a change in the environment. So through everything that Rick just mentioned, really a change in the environment to allow more of this work to happen.
Mira, from your perspective.
Yeah, again, just something to add, right? Because I think we agree on the main deliverable, but I think we need to make sure that our recommendations are acceptable to the different stakeholders. Otherwise, we can't accomplish that change. So I think we need to keep that in mind.
Jörn, from your perspective, sir?
More from a technological point of view, I just want to show that technology can work and that it can work for people to stay at home and participate in trials and not be a hurdle. but actually enabling them to participate in trials more, better, and just stay longer.
And Kai, for you.
Yeah, I would like to see a truly innovative, pioneering technology package that will then inspire the industry to do things a bit different. So hopefully we can inspire some new thinking after this.
Well, on that note, thank you, Kai. Thank you, the rest of the panel. All 200 of you who participated today, fantastic questions. There's still 25 questions that we were unable to get to. I will distribute them to the panel as well as our stakeholder groups. And again, with that, thank you for your time, everyone. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and we call this webinar closed. Thank you, everybody.